Hello, and thank you for joining us for tonight's Bull session. My name is Nathan Winkelstein. I'm the Associate Artistic Director at Red Bull Theater and will be your moderator this evening. We are discussing Lope de Vega's The Capulets and the Montagues, the new translation of it by Dakin Matthews, and the reading of it, which we just did, directed by the wonderful Melia Bensussen. Tonight is a conversation, but also very much a conversation with you, where we will be taking a lot of your questions. So please do just drop those questions right into your chat functions on both Facebook and YouTube. We will see them here and we will pop them up for you. And we will be going on as long as y'all provide us questions. So if you want a long evening, you have that under your control. And without further ado, let me bring in all of the wonderful guests that we have tonight, starting with the great Barbara Fuchs, the Distinguished Professor of English and Spanish at UCLA and Director of Diversifying the Classics, which is the organization that we have co-produced this with. We also have the director, Melia Bensussen, the Artistic Director at Hartford Stage, Dakin Matthews, our wonderful translator and performer. And then we have Christian Desmarais, one of our performers, nailed it, and Timothy D. Stickney, another one of our performers from the reading. Thank you all for joining for this evening's Bull session, where we discuss the fascinating Spanish Golden Age classic, now perhaps English contemporary age classic, that we all just worked on and performed. I would love to start, because I know probably many of the viewers saw our pre-reading conversation. I would love to start with someone who is not involved with that, our wonderful director, Melia. And just, Melia, this is now your third Golden Age classic that you've done a reading of for us. One of these days it'll be in person and it'll be very exciting. But how was it doing both this one in taking it in its own space, but also how has it been getting to know and kind of, with some of the same actors, even grow in the fluency of the structures of these plays and how to perform them for contemporary audiences?
Well, in a way, the answer is embedded in that wonderful question, because what you discover is that you have a company of actors, and what you discover is that we're all gaining more familiarity with the tropes, with the devices, with the spirit of them, right? I mean, for many of us in this country, we've done so much more Shakespeare, of course, right? This is the genius of your project, Barbara. I, for one, although a native Spanish speaker, am much more familiar with 20th century Spanish drama, more or less, except with some exceptions, Calderón. I know the big plays, but what's been extraordinary about getting to know these works through this platform, if you will, and with these amazing actors, is that you really feel the rhythm of the playing and the different soul of the piece, as opposed to Elizabethan theater or any other kind of theater, right? There's real familiarities and similarities to what we think of the Elizabethan stage. Dakin, you were wonderful about telling us as a company how much the stages, the Globe, and where Lope de Vega and Tirso Molina and so forth were staging their plays, how similar they were physically. But you also then see so the styles echo each other in the playing, but while in the playing and with these amazing actors that I've had the privilege to work with, thanks to Red Bull, you see how there's a different energy to these plays. There's more vent towards the absurd. There's more intermingling of the tragic and the farcical. It's not as tidy and genre specific as Shakespeare is. Even within his tragedies, yes, there's comedic sequences, but they're separate scenes with separate actors. Right? There's the comic actors and the tragic actors. And what's really cool about doing something like this, and Christian and Timothy, you guys both rock this. So over to both of you on that, if Nathan allows, since he's the moderator, won't try to be director queen here. But what is amazing is that within the same scene, a serious speech on one page, and then X number of lines later, you're playing it tongue in cheek. You're playing for a joke. You're pushing towards farce. It feels to me, and Barbara and Dakin, I throw this to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this later. Is how I mean, it's very theatrical. It's very self-aware. I feel like all the plays I've worked on for Red Bull, the playwrights are mocking the form that they're acing at the same time as they ace it. So there you go. Lots of questions for other people.
No, that's yes, and thank you, because it is. I mean, I think I'm fascinated, and we are going to get to how the performers who were coming to this script for the first time with this reading interacted with it. But I am curious from more of the scholarly side first for Barbara. I mean, your group, which I'd love for you to tell the people about. Your group has obviously been working on these translations now for quite a while. I'm curious about how much or whether it has affected how you think about these pieces, or even how you are continuing to translate these pieces, hearing more and more of them out loud, like what that interaction is from a scholarship perspective.
Yeah, so, we've been doing this for about 8 years through the Diversifying the Classics project. We've always made a point of saying that we're translating for performance. And so the work with actors, the work with directors has always been a key part of the process for us. And so when we are lucky enough to see a reading, we're madly taking notes on what seems to work, and, sitting in on rehearsals, which I did when Melia was doing our translations, also super helpful, because we are really aiming for a playable text, I think, going back to what Melia was saying, I do think that these plays have a very ironic temper, Part of that is through the figure of the gracioso. There's always this kind of, not just an echo like in your scene where, everything is being repeated that shouldn't be. But in general, the gracioso as this kind of lower class sidekick / second plot itself ironizes what is occurring in the main plot. The gracioso won't allow anyone to take him or herself too seriously, and is often the figure charged with breaking the fourth wall, with the meta theatrical, right? So that in itself, I think, is a really rich resource that they offer that ends up, I think, affecting the whole thing.
Thank you. So now I'll go to Dakin now. I'm a little hesitant because Dakin has the sort of massive expertise on both sides. So it's sort of like asking a Mount Rushmore person here, but we're allowed to have different opinions than Dakin. I probably won't, but y'all are. I want an interesting evening. So Dakin, my question for you is, you've heard this script read out loud a couple of times, and you've translated, I think, now 10 of these Golden Age classics yourself. And so first, I'm just curious, having now gone through this process over these last few days, is there anything you learned about the text, hearing it out loud, or any new piece of information that you might drive forward into your future work? And then I would love, after you answer that, to talk a little bit about your choice to keep things inside the rhyming structure, which is something that you do differently than the other translations out of Diversifying the Classics. So I'm curious about that. So there's 2 for you.
Okay, well, every time that I'm involved in a production, I've produced 5 of these myself for a couple of theaters in Los Angeles. And every time you go into rehearsal and every time you go into performance, you learn something. You learn if you've translated something badly, because the actors can't make sense of it. And you say, well, yeah, let me look at the text again. Oh yeah, I actually translated that very badly. So the actors will tell you if they can't figure out why somebody says something, they're going to tell you, I don't understand this. And then you try to justify your translation and they still don't get it. So you say, okay, I'll retranslate it. So you always learn something. But what you mostly learn about is the performative tone of the piece. That is to say, what it's going to be like, as Barbara will tell you over and over again, Lope's great intuition about plays is he wrote them for the audience to have a good time. And the audience tells you what they want to listen to and what they want to see. And they will let you know if you've written a good play. So you learn about the performative tone of the piece. You learn about, I always think of an audience is like it's like three-dimensional physics, that they are participating in this experience. And if they're not playing their part, you know that you're not doing your part right, you know? So an audience will always tell you. The plays are much more performative in nature, I think, than most of the Elizabethan plays. Therefore, they do lend themselves to bouts of virtuosity, more so, let's say, than later Shakespeare does. They do lend themselves to occasional self-parody, more than Shakespeare does, and they do lend themselves, a lot of them, to meta-theatricality, which is really, I mean, it's more than a play within a play. We're talking about something. Meta-theatricality is to theatricality what metaphysics is to physics. I mean, it's like a whole other world. So you do have to be attentive to how the play is working with the actors and with the audience. You can't translate in a vacuum. You can't translate in an academic vacuum. Now, I'm very fortunate that I've been also on stage for 55 years. So I have a sense of how plays work with audiences. So even from the very beginning, I always determined that I was going to write, like as Barbara says, plays, texts to be performed, not texts to be studied, but texts to be performed. And when I first started working on this, I just decided that verse, and specifically rhyming verse, was the hallmark of Golden Age plays. And I just couldn't justify to myself not trying to translate into rhyme. So that is very performative. You know, you always ask yourself, does the character know that she's rhyming when she's doing this? Sometimes they actually do, but most of the time they're aware they're in a different register. And that's, I use that word, so that they know that certain kinds of rhymes create certain kinds of tonalities. And then that's what I really listen for most of all, especially when, as Melia points out, sometimes you'll start off with, like, say, octavas, which is a very formal, difficult kind of rhyme. It's A, B, A, B, A, B, C, C. It's a tough rhyme for English because English is so rhyme poor. And sometimes they're very formal, and sometimes they're very ridiculous. And you can go from the formal to the ridiculous in a few seconds, you know? So some scenes will start in these very solemn octavas, and then suddenly they'll be parodying themselves. And you have to be able to follow that tonality. So that's yes, I do learn every time when you get the thing on stage, when you start to hear actors work with something, you begin to say, oh, I didn't get that right. I didn't get that right. Or they're not getting that right. You know, either of the two things are there. I do learn a lot from that. What was your second question?
You answered it. You got them both.
Okay.
And that's perfect. And it's actually a good transition to the actors who are trying to figure out why they're saying what they're saying.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I am curious. Like, both of you, obviously, as are immensely fluent in Shakespeare verse and are very used to attacking that particular set of, let's call them, tools that verse brings to you as an actor when you attack it. And it is quite clear as Dakin speaks that there seem to be quite a lot of tools to be given that are also handed to an actor in this rhyming sequence and in this verse structure. But of course, we're not nearly as fluent at knowing what those tools are. So I'm just curious for either one of you can take it, about if you could take us a little bit through what the process was as an actor trying to utilize, ignore, sort of utilize, sort of ignore whatever it was, the verse structure of the text and just how you attacked that. Just to avoid you both speaking at once, can we toss it to Timothy first, and then we'll hand it from there?
Good choice.
Well, thank you. Wow. Well, I wasn't afraid because I knew, okay, I can find my way through Shakespeare, through the range of his works with verse, and so we just jumped in. The Soriana didn't have the rhyming, but I mean not the same way, but it was verse, and so
that was the courage to fight a woman's wrong. So
Right.
Juan Inés de la Cruz.
Right.
I'm your
Well,
footnote, Timothy. You keep going.
So reading the Lope de Vega was, it was great that I read the packet before, so I knew I wasn't necessarily looking to deliver all of the different rhyme schemes. But knowing that they were there and then reading through it, it was like, okay, my brain can keep track of it on one level, but I couldn't say some of it. So knowing that we didn't have to serve it up, but that it would assert itself when it did, and often with a partner. So most often I was experiencing that I was being handed the thing that I would then quickly rhyme. And I think that I, the speaker, am aware that I'm answering, not necessarily in rhyme, but I am answering you. But then after that, my characters would not be aware of the rhyme until I picked it up again. But then as you were in a larger conversation, maybe 4 or 5 hander, you would hear it in the conversation you're participating in, and it would make people's point deeper or maybe add a resonance to someone else's statement. So it floats in and out of your awareness, both as the speaker and as a person present in the conversation that has these rhymes in it. And it all kind of asks you to both be willing to be very serious as the moment demands it, but give way to the comedy that is going to come. I mean, it always shows up. So trying to find your equilibrium in that has been a unique experience, but really exciting, and overdue. So I'm glad that UCLA has been doing this project, and that Red Bull, and Melia have asked me to come and play along, because having a consciousness, and of active practice with these texts as they're being brought to us, it works its way immediately into my classes, where I'm teaching Shakespeare in the city. And now the work is having a conversation that it didn't have at its time, right? And that's lovely, knowing that these people are creating in the same world, but not necessarily having the direct conversation. And yet, by the source materials and stories that they're sharing, there is an underlying conversation going on. But thank God that the atmosphere you all create lets us jump in and swing and find a way through these different texts, because they are different.
Christian, do you have anything you want to?
Very, very tough to follow up that answer. No, but I'll just say that, I think, in an interesting way, to rely on what Timothy is sort of saying really helps out in not that we're really going to pursue, hopefully, this Zoom theater concept much longer, hopefully, but it is that's the one thing you can really rely on, is keeping that ball in the air of the way that the text has been translated. And, I haven't read the original, but where it really does lend itself to everyone is building upon everyone else, and you're really keeping this ball in the air. What I really find super helpful too, actually, with Dakin translation is it feels very immediate, and by keeping the rhyme, it really helps you make sense of what you should emphasize and what you shouldn't, what specific words you're driving towards, which ones you can not skip over, but if everything is important and you emphasize everything, then nothing is important at the end of the day. And that's what I really appreciate about keeping the rhyme and keeping as much as you can, like you get this nice mixture of, it feels contemporary, it feels immediate, but it feels heightened. So as an audience member, at least when I'm listening to Timothy, or, you know, somebody like Carson, who is just so good at everything, you really feel like kind of you're achieving what Dakin was alluding to before, of like, it's a conversation with the audience. You feel like you have a way into every scene. Like there is the audience member is represented in every scene, whether that be Marin, who is kind of like our guide through a lot of this stuff, or even when Romeo is speaking to Benvolio and he's just like fed up with Benvolio taking forever. Like, it's interesting how you can play with certain characters to be the audience member in that scene. And I think it's this lovely marriage of all of those things. So Timothy gave a perfect answer. I just wanted to add that little.
Barbara?
Yeah, that's a great read of that scene, Christian. I just wanted to jump in quickly. Shameless plug. Timothy, just thinking about your students, I think one thing that we feel really strongly about is that the teaching and the training of actors is a really important part of this broadening the canon, you know? So I just want to remind everyone that all our translations are available to download from our website. You can also buy them as paperbacks, but they're all there on the website for free. And we've also produced a book of monologues for actors that's bilingual, because, you know, when you want to sort of look at what's out there, what are the showpieces, you know, and get a sense of what other plays there might be. And so that's 90 monologues. That's also available as a book. And I just feel that the training of actors is such a key piece of this, you know, because then actors will carry that with them as, I discovered this thing that lies beyond Shakespeare, and that is, unfortunately for many, this uncharted territory, and we're trying to make it more familiar. So I just wanted to say that I'm just delighted to think about you teaching your students this stuff. You can teach them about, you know, women authors, which so many students are like, where are the women in Shakespeare's time? And, you know, in the Spanish corpus, we have women writing plays. So.
And I wanted to just jump in on top of that and say, yes, amen. But also for women or female-bodied identifying performers, the monologues written and the characters written by the Spanish Golden Age playwrights, friends, are, you know, there's a wider range, let us say, because women were acting on the Spanish stage. You know, I think there was more development of female roles. You know, Barbara, I defer to you on the historicity of that, or the cause and effect, I should say, right? We don't know cause and effect, but it does seem that the fact that those women were in rehearsal, they would be arguing a different point of view. They would have a different point of view in the room. And as you pointed out to the female playwright. So that's just another wonderful aspect of these works that is different from the Elizabethan canon.
I just want to say, because Melia just spoke so eloquently, and it's an excuse for me to do another pitch. Melia will have to leave a little bit early in today's conversation. So anyone who's being shy with questions, especially if they're ones where you want to hear Melia's opinion, please do ask them, because like I got a couple more in the holster, but it's not going to last forever, y'all. So I need, so come to my assistance. On that note, we do have one question. It is, of course, a technical question, so it comes at me, which is that, but I will answer it quickly, which is that Vivian Casper is asking about the transcript on the video, which is the open caption on the video and then the inaccuracies in them, and asking me to comment on them. So I'll pull behind the curtain a little bit here. Why not? If you go on, we did feel like it was important to make sure that there was an open caption option for people who needed assistance in that way. It turns out, like so many of these hybrid things, to be a tricky little rabbit hole that you go down, especially in order to do them quickly. So what we tried this time was we tried to put it through an auto capture program so that we could get a video up as quickly as possible. So we basically accepted that when there is going to be a Spanish Golden Age script put through an audio transcript capture, it might be somewhat inaccurate. We accepted that for pace of turnaround. we decided that that was worthwhile with a video that had to disappear in a week. But we are always looking to improve and make it better. So if that was a hidden, like, why didn't you use this brilliant thing that I know about? Please do email me. My email is nathan@redbulltheater.com, and I'd love to have the problem solved for me. So that is the one question. If somebody could ask an artistic question, it would be of great relief to me. But yes. On that note, though, I'd love to toss it back to Dakin in this kind of conversation about the rhyme scheme.
Yeah, let me talk about that a little bit. I decided to rhyme, which meant that I was not going to be very rigorous about what we think of as meter in English. First of all, you should know that Spanish meter is quite different. They just simply count the syllables. And the accents, or where the accents might fall, are not nearly as important as how many syllables there are. If I had tried to rhyme and be metrically strict, as say an iambic pentameter or iambic tetrameter or something like that, I would have produced maybe one translation in my entire life. It's hard enough just rhyming. So I adopted an earlier English version of meter, which is called accentual meter. You only count the accents in the line, and you can have as many or as few unaccented syllables as you want. That meant that for a comic line, you could move almost into a limerick rhythm. And if you were going to be very serious or very formal, you could move into something very iambic. Most of the lines are 4 beats long. So some of the more formal speeches are basically iambic tetrameter. But once you get into the comic or the more dialogue scenes, you can vary the number of unaccented syllables throughout the lines. And that gives it a sort of almost a sense of free form. I also decided that I wanted certain rhymes to what I call chime, certain rhymes that make a point, when they're aphoristic or when they're capping a statement or when there's a formality about it, of a speechifying sort of feel about it. You should hear those rhymes. But if it's a conversation, you don't need to hear those rhymes. They'll be there, but you don't need to hear them. So I practice what I call stealth rhyme, which is that the only rhymes that you'll clearly hear are the ones that I want you to hear. And if I don't want you to hear them, I'll hide them by using run-on lines or rhyming mid-words or rhyming weak words or having half rhymes or near rhymes and things like that. So and also I do try to follow, after my first couple, I actually try to follow the exact rhyming pattern of the Spanish as well, which is even harder. In other words, if they're going to go into a five stanza rhyme, if it's A B A B A B, if it's A B A B A, I'll rhyme A B A B A. If it's A B A A B, I'll rhyme A B A A B, because the quintilla goes back and forth between those forms. I just felt, let's do it, let's try it. So you will get most. I remember after my 4th translation, I said to myself, I wonder if I can write an original play using the Spanish rhyme forms. And I did. I wrote an original play using all the Spanish rhyme forms, and we produced it. It actually won an award, but most of the audience didn't know it was entirely in rhyme. Even the actors didn't know it was entirely in rhyme. So I thought I was very successful stealth rhyming. I was so stealthy, they didn't even hear it most of the time. So.
Yeah, though I do.
What happened, to finish, I wanted the rhymes to rise not out of prose. What you get in Shakespeare often is you get great iambic pentameter, and then you get the occasional couplets that will finish off a scene or finish off a speech or make an aphoristic point. I wanted all my rhymes to rise out of a bed of rhymes, so that it was lesser rhymes and stronger rhymes rather than the other way around.
We have questions from the audience. It's very exciting. Neil Hoffman asks, and maybe Barbara, you can take first swing at this. Given a playwright like Lope de Vega, who wrote over 1,000 plays, how do you choose which to translate and perform?
Yeah, so we are in business for a very long time, I will say that. the beauty of having this incredibly rich corpus is, ideologically, tonally, and every other way, there are lots of very different kinds of plays. There's everything from, the Saints' Day play that Lope is commissioned to write for the city of Madrid to plays that would raise eyebrows today, as well as in the 17th century. We've gone for the latter. No, that gives us the freedom to really think about what is going to work for audiences today, what's going to interest audiences and practitioners today. We very much are translating in order to get these plays into circulation, into production. We're not interested in, simply the scholarly side of it. And there's another dimension to this, which is that a lot of what has been canonized as, the great Spanish plays are plays that confirm certain ideas about honor that basically British literary scholars had about Spain. And those were received easily because they seemed to tell them things they already thought they knew about Spain. And the plays that are much more skeptical of notions of honor and much more interested in the performance of identity, the performance of decorum, while everyone is actually doing what they want to do and sleeping with whom they want to, those were not canonized, right? And so there's a tremendous opportunity there, I think, not just to bring actors and audiences in the now a really exciting repertory, but also, frankly, to complicate our sense of how these things are divided up among nations, who gets to have an interesting history of theater, who gets to have an interesting relationship to interiority and identity and so on, right? So I think we've been quite deliberate in choosing plays that read in interesting ways in the now. And one actually fascinating aspect of it is, some things are transforming so quickly in our own society around things like understandings of gender identity that even plays that we began with when we translated 8 years ago read differently to us now. So the play that we started with, Force of Habit, which is about the two siblings who are brought up in quote unquote the wrong gender identity. The daughter is brought up on the battlefield, the son is brought up close by his mother's skirts. I'm not sure that we were having quite the conversations about gender identity when we translated that 8 years ago that we're having now. And I just had a workshop on the play with actors in Spain. And it was fascinating to sort of think about how it read to them now. So I think it's very exciting to be able to delve into this really rich and varied corpus and find so much that can speak to us today.
Can I just ask, just in a very simple way, and then I'll toss it to you, Dakin, and I may be completely wrong about this, but is it also just at the most basic level, in terms of choosing plays, don't you tend to choose plays that do not currently have English translations?
Yes, that is very much a principle. Occasionally, we will go back to a play that has not really been translated for performance, but given that what has been translated is the tip of the iceberg, and those plays have been translated over and over again, there's a real opportunity there. We also, I will say, have paid attention to plays by women and with, again, this kind of large agency for women represented in them. And we've also wanted to make sure translating plays by authors from what is today Mexico, as well as from Spain. So Alarcón and Sor Juana are an important part of really giving the full picture of this.
Yeah, my decision was kind of pragmatic. The first one was commissioned for me, actually. It was commissioned by the Old Globe. They never produced it, but it was commissioned, and that's what made me fall in love with it. And then I had the same sort of thing. What plays might people actually be interested in producing? And for me, that meant sometimes one of the classical plays, which I didn't felt had been really translated into a playable version, but Alarcón, as a Mexican born in Tasco, I wanted to translate his play. Sor Juana, who was also Mexican, born in what is now Mexico, I wanted to translate her plays for that reason. I wanted to translate plays that had a Shakespeare parallel. So there are three: Coriolanus, Henry VIII, and Romeo and Juliet. So I translated those three plays. And And then after my first Lope, which was the Romeo and Juliet, I'm on the parish of the Actors Chapel in New York City, and the patron saint there is Saint Genesius, the actors' patron saint of actors. So I found out Lope wrote a Saint Genesius play, so I decided to translate that, and it turns out to be a truly great meta-theatrical play and a self-portrait of Lope, which I thought was really, he sort of portrayed himself as this incredibly flawed, egotistical, manic, depressive actor who almost converts because it's a much better role than not being a Christian. So that was kind of it. So I chose plays. Courtship, I wanted to choose mostly comedies because the tragedies are very difficult. The tonality of finding those are very, very difficult, whereas the comedies are I think, easier. Plays that have a very strong gracioso character, the comic sidekick, I sort of went to there. So I made, I think, extremely pragmatic choices, especially if there were good roles for women. I thought most drama schools most conservatories in the world are constantly looking for plays with strong young female characters. And you're going to find those in the Spanish courtship comedies and even the sort of intrigue comedies. So that was my choices.
Well, I hope the Henry VIII is better than the Shakespeare Henry VIII.
Oh, I love the Shakespeare Henry VIII, but this one, it's like
Me too.
It's like a black comedy. It's like somebody wrote Henry VIII as if it was Richard III.
Oh, that would be better.
Henry is an idiot. Anne is a scheming bitch. Wolsey is a complete hypocrite. And Catherine of Aragon, of course, is the heroine of the play, being that she's Spanish, you know. And it's an adorable. I think it's a great fun play.
Great. Barbara, did you have a go for it?
Yeah, I actually had a question for the actors, because I think this conversation really provides this great opportunity to think about this question of the Shakespeare adjacency. You know, Dakin was just talking about the choice to translate those, and it's clear what those offer, right, for audiences that know the Shakespearean original and so on. I found myself wondering whether it constrains the actors because you have such a strong sense of where this should be going. And I ask because we had an experience with a play that it actually wasn't even Shakespeare adjacent, but it was really early on with a company that didn't have any experience with a commedia. And this was a play with two really strong female leads, and we just couldn't get the actresses to get into it. And when they were able to verbalize it, there was a sense that coming from Shakespeare, they couldn't quite believe how big these roles were, right? That the two sisters in this case were the ones manipulating the plot and, tricking their father and telling their suitors what to do and so on. And so I raised the question because, as someone who's really interested in getting these things produced, I can obviously see the advantage of the Shakespeare adjacent, but I would be interested in hearing the actors talk about, are there disadvantages? Is it an issue as an actor to come to these plays with a strong sense of, Romeo and Juliet or Henry VIII or the plays that you are more familiar with, that audiences are more familiar with?
I'll let Timothy go first. We'll stick to the same order. Me? Okay. Yeah, I think that's a really good, even when you work on Shakespeare, it's really difficult to come to it with no preconceived notions, sort of like Romeo and Juliet. Everyone has an idea of what they think Romeo or Juliet should be, or Mercutio, or any of these characters. So part of what was helpful was Dakin, he has a very helpful forward introduction, but I think it's also in the text a little bit too of, I don't know if I did it correctly, but you sort of, a lot of these characters, and sort of, I'm not a very good clown, Carson might be able to talk about this a little bit better, but it is 100% of everything kind of all the time, of you can go on a dime from 100%, I'm thinking of Octavio, for example, somebody very kind of annoying mama's boy, really not very good with women. But then when honor is introduced, can flip on a dime and be like this stock, like what a lot of people view Tybalt to be, like this angry, really entrenched in family values, honor, all these things, where it's like that happens in the course of a line. And I don't know if it's right, and with rehearsal, you'll figure it out. But I think all of these characters have that. And that's sort of a key is like, they're actually all in there, not in a funny way, but in the impetus clowns, where you just commit 100% to authenticity of the line or what the thought you're trying to convey or what you're trying to get and want in that specific scene. And it really using the text as a clue of like, this play, it is kind of 100% of everything all the time. And it switches on a dime. And Timothy, I'm sure you probably have worked on a lot more Shakespeare plays than I have. I've really kind of only done 5 or 6 very diverse characters within it. But I think that's really, really helpful to kind of heighten yourself to these life. A lot of times they are life or death stakes.
Well, one thing I will say is that Lope's Romeo and Juliet are much more like almost all the teenagers I know. And
so dramatic, right? Where you're
Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet are extraordinary people, but Lope's Romeo and Juliet are like valley teenagers that I know. So it's more. There's almost more realism about Lope and creating these characters who don't know who they are most of the time, and are sort of making it up as they go along. You know, thinking they're one thing and then finding out they're somebody completely different. So I love that about Lope. He's these characters have, some of them have very little self-knowledge.
I'm trying. Oh, is that me? I'm thinking about the inhibition, I guess, of those performers as they were approaching the material. And on the one hand, it's surprising because you're thinking, well, you already worked with heightened text, so you're used to having the freedom burden of the size being negotiable. You're right, size and reality being a bit malleable. But I think you said the key. One, the negative we all have to understand, except that we've also gotten along with our huge dose of Shakespeare, is that most of us are intimidated by it on some level, even performers of it. But the commedia is the way through, because if you recognize the commedia that's in both traditions, but dressed up, slightly differently for the time, then that gives me access. I have permission to go into the rest of the pantaloon, the rest of the Capitan, because it hasn't been buried up under all that Elizabethanness. And working with these plays does let you see that while Shakespeare has a lot of clowns, he does have those specific characters. And it is more human to see the moments when the fathers are just slightly older versions of their idiot kids, trying to work everything out. And, okay, great, guys, whatever. Actually getting to see that happen with them instead of kind of knowing on some level where, sure, it must happen, makes it all more fun. But I think it is the commedia. All of us don't have as much comfort in working with the characters from commedia and giving them their size and drama and comedy all available at once. But I suspect that those who've gotten the chance to work in this series, and actors who will be chomping at the bit, either haven't gotten the Shakespearean fear or they have had some mask or commedia work, because then you see all the clues in the material that's being translated. So, and then when you hear it coming from other characters, it reaffirms that, yes, this is the tenor tone of this scene. Okay. And I wonder how an audience will respond,
I would also love to jump in on this question, Barbara, just because Melia has left. I feel like a director perception might be interesting here just a little bit of like, I hear your concern and I go, not your problem. I go, that's our problem. Right. Is that like, and in fact, So often the thing that you're talking about us all thinking we know what a Shakespeare character is the greatest hurdle that needs to be overcome in a room, right? It's like we all think the balcony scene is Romeo going and Juliet going, huh? And it's actually Romeo going and Juliet going, get the fuck out of my garden before you die. And it's a very different scene, excuse my language. But it's like so in some ways, I would actually argue that putting out these parallel but clearly different texts may actually help us realize that we should, every time we look at a text, look at it like it is a new text and don't run on the assumption of what a character is.
Yeah, it's wonderful to come to a play where there is no tradition of having played it. You are actually creating a character in English for the first time in some cases, and there is no tradition. I remember when I brought La Verdad Sospechosa to Chamizal, to a Golden Age theater festival. It's The Liar. It's the beginning of the plays about the liar, which then Goldoni and Cornet completely stole. And there is a tradition in Spain of playing it as a very moralistic play in which the liar is punished for being such a bad liar. But in fact, he's the most fascinating, enjoyable character in the play. And we played it for a flat out comedy. And it's the first time it had been played, I think, that way in English. There have been some translations and some performances, and the audiences just loved it. But some of the Spanish scholars were somewhat upset that we didn't punish him well enough at the end, that he should have learned his moral lesson, you know. That's like also there's a very long theory in Spain about one of Don Juan's conquests, the sort of fisher girl, Tisbea, that she deserved to be dumped. You know, she should have known better. It's her fault. So there's no sympathy for Tisbea. And again, we just played her as a kind of an innocent and a smart young girl who was very proud of herself and her ability to control her emotions. And then when she crashed, she was devastated, you know. And there's a long tradition in Spain where Tisbea deserves her punishment because she was a haughty girl and she deserved to be taken down a notch, you know. But we come to these with no such preconceptions, and it's like a free-for-all. So if you come to a play that you think has a Shakespearean analog, you find out very quickly that it's not Shakespeare's play. So you have a kind of a freedom. I can go anywhere. Holy cow, this is fun. I can, you know, take the top off my head and let anything fly out. So.
Yeah, I love the idea of the translation as, you know, offering a new take on the play, because it's true that, just as you were saying, Timothy, that, you know, and Nathan, that people think they know what they're getting when they look at a Shakespeare play. It's true that in Spain, there are the same assumptions about, you know, the Golden Age canon, right? And particularly, I think it's hard for people to see some of the places where these plays are so subversive, so not what you would expect. And then there's like a discussion about, do you privilege those middles where the plays are showing all kinds of stuff? Or do you focus on the conclusion where, you know, as Dakin is saying, you know, there's a moralizing end and things are put in their place? And if you've always read the plays in a certain way, it's really difficult to break out of that. Well, no, the play ends this way, therefore those are its values, right? And when you translate, you know, you're close reading. Actors are close reading. Directors are close reading. And sometimes in that shared exercise of close reading, you know, you can really open up these plays and make them new, you know, make them new for everyone involved.
And I have to imagine with the church and everything else that they were the playwrights were probably facing similar challenges as the English playwrights of like, if you want to say things that are subversive and interesting, you say them in the middle and then you wrap it up with a really clean moral bow.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the censorship is much more worried about religious stuff than about sex. So the plays are full of, you know, probing at the part of honor that has to do with chastity for women and so on, and that they're very free, right? Like one of the plays that we translated, The Widow of Valencia, which is all about, you know, the facade of honor, right? This woman who announces, I'm not going to get married again, because why would you, right? Widows are one of the few places in that society where women have agency. And then she likes a guy in the marketplace, and she asks a servant to bring him to her. He has to come with a hood on so he can't see her. So, it's all about the decorum of, when sees me doing this, it's as though it didn't happen. And, eventually things happen in the play, and they get married at the end and so on. But in the middle, it's wild.
Yeah.
And directors are starting to make really interesting choices. So I saw a production of that in Spain last summer where they didn't have the marriage. They left town. And when they leave town, it's still the widow calling the shots. And all it takes is, just kind of cutting a little bit before the actual end. And all of a sudden, for modern audiences, right, that play leaves open.
It's like having Isabel walk away from the Duke at the end of Measure for Measure.
Exactly.
Isn't there a phrase in Spanish that describes it, to say without saying, to say but not say? Isn't it hablar y no hablar? There's there was sort of a motto that was used by Spanish playwrights to describe what they were doing. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. That I'm saying I can deny. I'm saying it with deniability.
And again, also the figure of the gracioso, whom we spoke about, already, right? That sort of coming at it from a different angle, puncturing the ideals, right? Because it's spoken by a lower class character, there's a freedom to say certain things that the nobles can't say, but they're all doing them, right? So.
I do think that we could use a good new translation of the Duchess of Malfi Stewart. Yeah, there's a parallel Duchess of Malfi in Spanish as well. So I don't think I'm the one to do it. I think I'm done. But I said that 2 years ago, so I don't know. You never know.
Give him 6 months, y'all. He'll have one.
Give me another pandemic, and I'll be back at it.
Is there
please, not worth the price?
Is that one that you have considered at UC? Is that one you have considered, Barbara?
No, because I believe there are translations of it.
Yeah, I think there are.
And I haven't really looked to see how playable they are. But it hasn't really fallen under our preference for things that have never been translated rule.
So this is an interesting question because there's an implication inside it. This is something I realize I don't know. In the source material, do Romeo and Juliet kill themselves? So is Lope going away from that, or did Shakespeare invent it? Because I feel like that's an implication in this question here.
Oh, I think they did die in the source material. I think, of course they die in the source material, yeah.
Okay, and could Lope have gotten...
I think he just chose to go another way, just as Lear and Cordelia survive in the source material.
Right.
Shakespeare decided to go another way, and in The Winter's Tale does not end well in the source material.
Yes, right, of course. So yes, but you don't think it was because he was worried about the Catholic Church's view on suicide?
I'm trying to think if there are any suicides in the Golden Age plays that I've read.
I was just thinking the same thing. It's a good question, Anne. I'm not coming up with any. I'm sure there must be some.
One of the most interesting plays I know that, again, it's not one that is a king whose wife has cheated on him wants to have her and her lover killed, but he wants it to be legal. He doesn't want it to be out of revenge, so he concocts this elaborate plot to have his wife murdered by her lover, and then he can execute the lover for killing the queen, and it's all done legally, so he can say it wasn't revenge. It was, it wasn't emotion. It was really bizarre. That's a bizarre one. That's a bizarre tragedy.
And just because we're getting tight on time, we do have one final question other than those two, which is actually a technical question. Joan, I apologize for the delay in pulling it up. I just didn't want to interrupt the kind of artistic conversation. This is especially because I wanted to answer it because it's sort of my baby, which is some of the tech that was just used in Zoom. For those of you who have seen the reading, if you haven't, shame on you. Go see it. You have until Sunday midnight. But for those of you who have seen the reading, this is as you saw it, the kind of semi-transparency that you could see. This was a long evolution throughout COVID, and it utilized the kind of big jump was utilizing a program called OBS, online broadcasting system, which is a free software which allows you to basically share video feeds. So what it allowed us to do was to move around the boxes, change shapes of the boxes, and all of that. And then we started to realize that there were tricks we could do with transparency. Basically, what happened there, the actors can talk about how weird it is from their perspective, is what happened there is that all of the actors not only had green screens up, but they had on their green screens a virtual green screen on their green screen, so that they all had identical colored green screens. And then the background on OBS was exactly the same color green screen, which then allows us to superimpose an image through all of it. So it makes it, so if we had wanted to, you wouldn't have actually seen the box shapes at all. They could have been floating, and we have in other readings had their torsos at the bottom of the screen. So it actually looks like they're in exactly the same space, but that gets tricky with perspective very quickly. So the program's OBS, it is very complicated for your actors. So God bless them. They were just staring at their cameras and their script and just hoping that we were telling the truth when we said that it looked interesting on the other side. So y'all, Joan thought it was quite effective in letting the actors out of the Zoom box, even though you felt trapped inside a green goo. So
you guys have always been at the forefront. I was just remembering when Juliet, is pretending to be a ghost. It reminded me of very early in the pandemic when you did The Witch of Edmonton, and you were playing beautifully with the green screen fade for witchiness, and it was an early harbinger of just how on the forefront of all this you guys were going to be.
So that was actually a happy mistake. That was us not realizing that the green screen had grabbed the actor's face instead of the background. So we were like, why is she like moving in and out? Like, don't touch anything, keep it. And then we figured out later what happened. But I remember like being like, I have no idea what's going on. Whereas now all of those tricks are like second nature. But yes, we are very good at this type of theater that none of us want to do anymore. So that's great. But this reading shows that it can still be effective and in a non-joking way. This particular reading with these talents and with this audience, with a program that is on the West Coast, with actors from the West Coast, a director directing from Colorado, we couldn't do what we did here on a stage. And so in terms of being able to hear some of these plays with actors of a certain quality and getting a good hearing of it, there is definitely a world where this still matters. And so I'm glad that y'all enjoyed it and had fun with it. Amlin Gray says that in the source material, this isn't a question, but it's fascinating. In the source material, Juliet commits suicide by holding her breath. So, that's a strong will. Yes. So on that note, though, I do think that we have to call it. It has. Thank you for your questions. It got us to a perfect hour. Thank you all for your conversation, Barbara, Dakin, Timothy, Christian, Melia in absentia. It has been a real pleasure. For those of you watching, you still do have until Sunday at midnight to watch the reading. If you have friends who you think would be interested, that's the amount of time you have. You can watch it with or without the somewhat inaccurate captions. So please do take advantage of that if you can, because after that, it disappears for forever. Next up for us is another digital program. It is me having a chat with a certain Oscar Award winner talking about Shylock. That is, of course, the great F. Murray Abraham. We'll be doing that on October 3rd at 7:30, so check that out. And we have a number of other exciting readings coming up down the line. The Relapsed Duchess of Malfi, which will be on stage, but also filmed to the great unknown. So
would you tell people how to get a ticket to watch this for the next 3 or 4 days?
Yeah, go to redbulltheater.com. It is the first thing on our website right now. So go there and click your way through getting tickets, and you will be able to get them. And if you have any concerns whatsoever, all of our email contacts are on our website.
Can I still get a comp?
Hey, maybe send me an email, Dakin. It's your play.
And for those of you who are in LA, we are having an in-person festival of Hispanic classical theater this weekend at UCLA. So look up Diversifying the Classics and you'll find the entire program, 8 different events. So I hope to see some of you there.
Yes.
Cool.
Thank you all. I think that's it for this evening. So have a wonderful night, and we'll see y'all in the audience soon. And I hope I'll work with all of you again soon. Bye.
Good night.
Thanks. Bye.